Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
Listen up if you want to promote your personal growth and self-awareness. I found the Foojan app last month and I have been absolutely loving it. I personally have never learned guided meditation, but thanks to this app, I now have learned incredible tools for my own stress relief and emotional self-awareness. Not to mention, there are self-evaluation tools and professional coaching available to utilize however your journey to self-discovery takes you. Join Foojan today and redefine your life one step at a time.
Do you wish to wake up one day and hit the Life Reset button? Life Reset, the awareness integration path to create the life you want by Dr. Foojan Zeine, helps you navigate crucial life areas, heal the past traumas, and cultivate fulfilling relationships and careers. Life Reset is your guide to a profound journey to... Welcome to The Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Foojan Zeine. I'm a psychotherapist and author and the creator of the Awareness Integration Theory. I'm so thrilled to have you join me today because I can promise you an amazing and insightful discussion. I'm so honored to have Dr. Daniel Siegel with me today. Dr. Siegel is an executive director of Mindsight Institute and the founding co-director of the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA, where he is the co-principal investigator of the Center for Culture, Brain and Development and clinical professor of psychiatry at the School of Medicine. He's an award-winning educator, then is the author of 5 New York Times bestsellers and over 15 other books, which have been translated into over 40 languages. As the founding editor of Norton Professional Series on Interpersonal Neurobiology, Dan has overseen the publication of 100 books in this framework, which focuses on the mind and mental health. A graduate of Harvard Medical School, then completed a postgrad training at UCLA, specializing in pediatrics and adult, adolescent, and child psychiatry. He was trained in attachment research and narrative analysis through a National Institute of Mental Health Research Training Fellowship, focusing on how relationships shape our autobiographical ways of making sense of our lives and influence our development across a lifespan. So with all of that, today we will be talking about his latest book, Personality and Wholeness, in Therapy Integrating 9 Patterns of Developmental Pathways in Clinical Practice. It was a very eye-opening, heartwarming conversation about how our personalities created and formed, and what kind of patterns they get as we grow up, and what is it that we can do as we're trying to come back into wholeness, and what are the ways that each pattern shows us, and how we could be in the flow of shifting from one to another as we learn about who we are and as we work through some of the thought and emotional and behavioral patterns in order to come back to our wholeness. I had an amazing conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm positive that you will also not only enjoy, but also learn a lot from our conversation. Now, be sure to subscribe to this podcast and my YouTube channel. You can find them all at my website, foojanzeine.com. And you can go to any of the social media, share with me your thoughts and what you like to hear in our podcast and the subjects that you're interested in. And just your views and, anything you want to share with me. I love to hear it. I'm also going to ask you to go to the Foojan app. Got 31 areas of life where you could go through this guided journaling and videos and really learn about who you are and your present time, and clean and clear up your past and co-create and envision your tomorrow. We've got amazing response with people around benefiting from it and improving their different life areas, about 60 to 70%. So I'm positive you will enjoy it. It's Foojan. Go to Foojan app in your Apple Store or Google Play. So I'm hoping to see you there too. Now, without further ado, here's Dr. Daniel Siegel. Intentional Parenting, a practical guide to awareness integration theory, written by Dr. Jafari, Dr. Foojan Zeine, and Dr. Manoukian, three experts in human development, is your step-by-step guide to raising a healthy child prepared for a culturally integrated world. You're supported in parenting infants to adolescents using the latest evidence-based scientific research on parenting. Order your copy on Amazon now.
Eliminate stress, reduce anxiety, and decrease depression. Dr. Foojan Zeine's awareness integration theory has helped thousands like you get incredible life-changing results. The Foojan app gives you her evidence-based treatment in the palm of your hand. Download today.
I am so honored to have you, Dr. Dan Siegel, with me. This is, I think, second or third interviews we've done throughout the years. I follow you wherever you are. I read all your books. I share your books with the world. And it's just such an honor to have you with me. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Zeine. Thanks for having me. And it's a pleasure to see you again.
Absolutely. It's beautiful to see you. Today, we're going to talk about your new book that's coming out, Personality and Wholeness in Therapy. And as I was listening to some of your lecture, let's start with, can you explain what personality is?
Sure. Well, in our general everyday use of the word personality, sometimes we use it to mean like, is someone the life of the party? Oh, they have so much personality, and you can feel their presence when they walk into a room. But the way we academically and clinically use it in a more kind of scholarly way is for a pattern of emotions, thinking, and behavior that are persistent in an individual across contexts and across developmental stages. So we can look to study personality traits, aspects of what we call personality that relate to emotions, thinking, and behavior. And that's what I mean by using the word personality in the name of the book. Personality, patterns of emotion, thinking, and behavior that relate to an experience of wholeness, so personality and wholeness, and what do you do about that as a therapist? So that's the book I wrote with 4 of my colleagues.
And going back into looking at how we use the word personality, we also, as therapists and clinicians, we also work with personality disorders. So
Yes.
would that mean that when we're talking about personality, it's also types of emotions and thought processes and behaviors that are workable and moves forward someone? And when we're talking about personality disorders, those are the types of emotion patterns of thinking and behavior that is not workable and kind of not healthy for the person?
Exactly.
Okay.
And as you know, and I certainly this is true for me as a therapist also, the majority of therapists learn about personality disorders, but we don't learn anything about personality in therapy. So I was kind of struck when I started asking my colleagues, my students, and then in big audiences, I would just say, how many of you are therapists? Everyone, it's a therapeutic meeting, everyone raises their hand. I said, how many of you were taught how to work with personality, not personality disorder, but personality in therapy? And no one raises their hand, including me.
Yes. I think in our field, the only way that personality has been used has been in personality tests, because they were utilizing them in maybe getting hired by companies, or people were just excited to know what kind of personality types they have. One of the things that was always a worry for me is that people would limit themselves to say, this is who I am, and then, categorize themselves. One of the beauty that as I was listening to your lectures about this book, is this movement. Not only you explain how the personality shows up and gets created, but how, the movement of it, not only throughout the years, but also throughout the day, how it can move from one extreme to another, or from one angle to another, depending on the emotions that are showing up for us and how we express those emotions. But going back first, what was interesting and fascinating, and I'd love for you to explain that, is I heard you say that the energy that comes through the brain creates the mind, shapes the mind. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, so going back many years, about 33 years, I was in academics, and it was the beginning of the decade of the brain. So I brought together many people who were interested in the brain, and looking at mental processes like emotions, like memory, like attention, like consciousness, like thought, all those different things that we attribute to our mental lives. And the simple statement was that brain activity was essentially the synonym for what mental activity was. So in part, the brain's participation in those mental activities of our lives is about how its neural firing occurs, which is basically energy flow. But as you can see in you and I speaking with each other, this energy flow also goes beyond the skull of the brain's encasement in the head, and it extends, yes, throughout the whole body. So we feel it in our heart, we feel it in our gut, we feel it in our muscles. And now we're communicating with each other, one person to another, and anyone listening in and participating in this conversation. So you can see energy flow is a good way to start with thinking about brain activity and its role with the mind, but it's not the end of it, because relationships, like communication that connects us, is based on energy flow that has a symbolic value. We put a formation in this energy flow, so it symbolizes something. Like if I say, hello, Dr. Zeine, that's different from if I say, goodbye, Dr. Zeine. The difference is only hello and goodbye. They're both sound energy, but the formation of that sound is a greeting when we meet each other. The other is a greeting when we're departing. So they have very different information. So energy in a formation that stands for something else is information. So this is basically what the mind is it's an information unfolding that, yes, involves brain activity, but it also involves our relational communication.
You shared about how obviously the environment that a child is in the mother's womb, and the environment of the chemicals that the connection that the mother and the environment have with the womb. And then you also talked about how as the child comes out to this world, there's an experience that the child has, and that temperament that gets created is the formation of the personality. Can you share a little bit about this?
Yeah, well, I'll just name my colleagues. David Daniels, who passed away in 2017, Laura Baker, Denise Daniels, David's daughter, and Jack Killen. The five of us are scientists who gathered together starting around 20 years ago. And we were asking the question, is there a science we could come up with that would explain the observations that David had collected in over 50,000 people in something called the Enneagram of personality, sometimes simply known as the Enneagram for short. And this popular system isn't based on science, but when I was asked by David and Denise to come spend a week with them, I was really kind of impressed by the deep differences across these 9, what in the Enneagram world are sometimes called types. But we as a group who got together at that meeting, these scientists, felt that there is no evidence, as personality researchers have demonstrated, for a type. So, for example, here's one of the books, just to show you, the Handbook of Personality. Look how thick this thing is. In communications across the academic world that study personality, we need to drop the word type. So you don't look for like, I'm this type or that type. Instead, there are characteristics of how we regulate emotions, how we experience emotions, particular emotions we feel. That's the emotion side. The thought side is, what do we pay attention to? What matters to us? What do we focus our attention on? What are we preoccupied with? That's the thought side. The behavior side is, how are we interacting with people, with the planet? How do we comport ourselves in the world? So that's the behavior. So we've defined personality already. So when we say a personality characteristic, it's more on a continuum. So if we have 7 billion people on the planet, you could argue, listen, there's 7 different pattern groupings of personality. So then you might say, well, why bother studying such a thing if there's, just say there's 7 billion individuals, and that would be fine. But what David found was that actually those 7 billion people, at least the 50,000 subset that he found of them, seemed to describe their inner experience of emotions, thoughts, and what they see their behaviors as, and even what other people observe their behaviors as being, in 9 different, we call them patterns. So the difference between a pattern and a type is a pattern is a wide array of a continuum of different characteristics and traits, which we'll talk about, whereas a type is like you're fixed in this noun-like grouping. This is more like a verb-like set of patterns that can, as you point out, can change. So we talk about personality patterns in our model. And as you're pointing out, though we know some people are very stressed when they're pregnant, still there's an experience for the baby, even if there's stress, which would certainly have a big impact, but of just not needing to do anything in order to just exist. So there's an effortless being that we believe gets encoded into a system in the brain called implicit memory. So you have a bodily sense of what we're going to say is wholeness. You have an emotional experience of just contentment. You have the perceptual experience of just no separation. You have the bodily experience of just floating there without having to do anything. You're just being. And these 4 are the foundations, behaviors, perceptions, emotions, bodily sensations that are the foundations of something called implicit memory. So we think you have an implicit memory of what we're going to name as wholeness, even if there's stress, but then we should do some research and see how was that different from you if your mother was really stressed or didn't want you when she was pregnant. So that's a whole set of questions you could address. But for the broad population and the broad experience, we think this implicit memory of no separation, effortless being is what you are born with. And then once you're out here, if you don't breathe, you die. If you don't eat, you die. If you don't have someone taking care of you, you die. It's literally a do or die situation. And you're basically working for a living from then on, so we think personality is the drive to regain a sense of wholeness.
So it's the emotional regulation that consistently is happening to bring you back into the homeostasis of the wholeness.
Yeah, exactly. As best you can, because you can never get to a state of pure just being, because we're out here in the world. But you really, I think everyone has a drive to feel that feeling they have deep inside that they know, I used to have it and it's gone. Well, we are trying to explain this description that people said, I used to have something and it's gone. Well, you used to actually have no separation. You used to have just being and not feeling threatened. You used to have a time before all these realities of your actual being in this world out here, or listening to the news and feeling overwhelmed, or having relationships fall apart, or getting older and feeling your body decay. All these things we think trigger your personality. But early on, what we believe happens is there's something called temperament. And temperament is defined as a proclivity of the nervous system, a propensity of the nervous system to have a sensitivity to the world, or an intensity to the world, or a way of responding to new things in the world. That's just to name 3: sensitivity, intensity, a response to novelty, and many other features. But let's just stay with those 3. We believe that there are these networks beneath the higher part of the brain called the cortex. So beneath is sub. So we call these subcortical, below the cortex networks that are about motivation, basic motivation. A colleague of ours, Jaak Panksepp, wrote about these in great detail. We think 3 of them help us understand the 9 Enneagram groupings. And in trying this out, it looks like when you combine those 3 motivational networks with three other aspects of what we think is temperament anyway. The tendency of people to have kind of an energy focused inward, energy focused outward, or some people are kind of a toggling between inward and outward. Then you get those three tendencies of attention, which I made up a word, a tendency. So when you combine these three attendancies with the three, what I call vectors or directionalities of motivation, which I'll describe in a moment, that's where you get the 9 Enneagram groupings that are often talked about in the popular literature.
So Dan, this is what, when I went through the Enneagram, I was between 2 and 8 and 4. So if I'm really bonding and certainty and love is there and I feel secure, it's that I become this hopeless romantic, which is all is well, all is beautiful. I could be the helper. And then if I get afraid and I have uncertainty, then I go into really a controlling side and I need to control everything. My anxiety comes in and does that. So far, those were the 3 numbers that I remember. So
yeah.
Share with me what you see based on those numbers.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing because, David Daniels' approach is something called the narrative Enneagram, which is a beautiful school of the narrative tradition that David started with Helen Palmer. And now it's run by a number of colleagues, including Terry Saraceno and Renee Rosario. And, that way of getting to know your grouping, your Enneagram grouping, takes many, 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 many hours. Even now, I'm playing with trying to see if we can take some of these characteristics and put them in a short little questionnaire and see if my patients can figure out where they're at in this whole 9 palette. I call it a palette, this 9 different ways you can experience life. And, we're doing the statistical analysis right now to see if it's valid. But in any event, so we want to say that the Enneagram questionnaires that exist at this moment don't have research-based reliability. So we want to be very cautious. So I would almost invite you to go the other way. I've met many people who say, oh, I took an Enneagram test. They said, I'm this number. I said, oh, cool. That's cool. Great. And they go, but I listened to your talk and now I realize I'm actually more like over here, a little this and a flavoring of that. I go, well, okay. And they go, which one's right? And I said, just go with your experience. And they go, well, it feels like this, we call it PDP, this Patterns of Developmental Pathways model is much more fluid. And I don't have to cram myself into one type. I said, well, go with whatever feels right for you. We're not like proselytizing or trying to preach this stuff. However, so what I would say is that, people do seem, about 80% anyway, to find that when you cluster these patterns into let's start with the vector. If you remember the letters A and B and C, you can remember the vectors. A is for agency. Some people seem to have a drive for this kind of embodied empowerment, to have their basic essential needs met. And it has an oomph to it that you can feel in your gut. It's kind of I call it an ALEF, an anatomic location of energy, activation, and flow. That's the acronym ALEF, A, and then the letters LEAF. So this feeling in the gut, when you describe, I'm out there, asserting myself like that, that would fit in with a pattern of agency that's outward. And the emotion regulation mode in that cluster appears to be upregulated. So if you're feeling angry or irritated, it's outward and it's out in the world like that. And, I can get like that too. So I can find myself moving what we would call agency outward. So you combine the vectors, the first thing you describe, agency, the tendency there is outward. For you, when you're describing that, sometimes you go to, that's the 8. You when you're feeling, safe and relaxed and you get immersive in this whole romantic sense of things, for us, that's the second vector, the bonding vector, when you're in the inward aspect. So now you're going to another vector and you're switching your tendency. But what it shares with the 8, which is really fascinating, it's almost like a bridge, is this upregulation of emotion. So now you're not just upregulation, the anger and the irritation, the frustration, and you feel it, but in your heart, you're just upregulating this feeling of, oh, life is amazing and it's beautiful and it's fantastic. Oh my God, this is just, I can't believe the privilege of being here. And you see poets write like this. And some of my dearest friends, are or were in this grouping. And it's absolutely exquisite to share that immersion and the upregulation of a relational love and all this stuff. So that would be, for us, that would be the bonding vector. And now you've put the tendency inward. So if you think about the womb story, used to be at one with the womb. Now you're merging essentially with nature, with the poets, with the musicians, with the person you're in love with love making, with going for a walk on the beach, with the sunset. So you're getting back to wholeness, feeling it deeply in your heart, really. And then when you describe going in the classic Enneagram of personality of the two, that stays in the bonding vector. So that's your bridge. But now you're going over to an outward focus. So what we've noticed in the bonding outward focus is you're actually shifting out of the emotion. In this case, it would be the emotion of separation, distress, and sadness. And you're attending to other people's needs in order to establish a connection, because relational connections are really the motivation of this system. So that's how we would describe, this journey between 8, 4, and 2, for those of you who know the Enneagram world. For us, what's cool about this is you've got these three variables. 2 we think are from temperament. 1 may be a natural outcome, the emotion regulation mode. So you have basically, you've gone from, the agency outward upregulating. You've bridged over to the, bonding inward, but upregulating still. But now you're in the bonding group. So now you take your tendency, you go outward, and then you go to the the bonding outward. And now you're in the shifting out of that emotion mode altogether, because maybe it's too upsetting or something. So we call those bridging patterns. And so you can see the logic of why that might be your journey. I could do the same for what we would call your baseline, my baseline, when it's in a totally different vector. And it's something called dyadic, where there's a toggling between inward and outward. And I can absolutely see in my own lived experience these bridges where this PDP, the Patterns of Developmental Pathway framework, totally makes sense of it. And so people who are in the Enneagram world have been so excited because they say, oh my God, this explains all these, they call these the connecting lines or something like that. 88% of those connecting lines are explained by this PDP framework.
Beautiful. So you've shared about 3 types of the fear, the anger, the sadness, and fear. And
well, yeah, so those are the emotions of agency. We look at the motivation, agency, bonding, and certainty would have the emotions exactly, if you're saying, of anger, and all its variations, irritation, frustration. Bonding would be separation, distress, or sadness, and certainty would be fear or anxiety. Exactly.
okay.
Yeah.
And you had also shared that most of us kind of resonate with one kind of the emotion. So as I was listening to you, I was looking at what does resonate with me. And if you left me alone, I would crawl into sadness.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like a resonating, and I've worked obviously as a therapist with a lot of people, which is there's nothing coming from outside world, still they will go into the fear or anxiety, or they will go into the anger.
Exactly. Well, yeah, go ahead.
No, please share. I wanted to.
Yeah, no, that's so powerful you're saying that. One way to think about it is a small little, propensity in your, let's say when you're 1 day old. Think about it this way. If you go to the subcortical areas, these are kind of formed before birth, actually. Let's say in your case, the bonding motivational network, which is the very network that gives rise to sadness and separation distress. Let's say it's a little bit more sensitive than the agency one and the certainty one, which give rise to anger and give rise to fear, respectively. So now you're a week old. And because it was a little more sensitive, it started getting activated a little more. And let's say it was a little more intense in how it reacted. A little more juice was gone there. And because of all that, especially if it's also with novelty, it gets activated. Those are those three aspects of temperament we talked about. So this network then is going to have more firing. Well, what we know is firing leads to wiring. So now you're a month old. And what started as a teeny little increase in sensitivity, intensity, and novelty response, now you're 2 months old, and it's actually reinforcing anatomically its own intensity and sensitivity and response to novelty. Now you're 6 months old, and that's now your jam. That's, no one made it happen. It's kind of started with an innate proclivity or propensity, right? And then neuroplasticity, the way the brain responds to its own self-generated firing patterns, going to make you have these increased temperament traits. So, and you're only 6 months old, 9 months old. Now you're a year old, right? Now we add on top of that attachment. And what our hypothesis is that if those attachments are not secure, so you can have avoidance where there's emotional distance. You can have non-secure where people are intrusive and inconsistent. So that leads to what's called ambivalence. Or you can have terrifying things happen, and that leads to what's called disorganization. So if you just look at those three forms of non-security, depending on your temperament, you're going to probably respond in different kinds of ways. But if you're secure, what we think happens is the intensity of those temperaments rigidifying how you live and making you prone to chaos and rigidity, overall, because like a deeper groove into that personality pattern, it's a lighter groove. So you're able to access different ways of being more easily. So the overlap of attachment and temperament in this very specific way means that attachment is not making you have a certain personality. If it's non-secure, we think it creates a prison of personality. And the goal of growth is to move to that personality being more like a playground of possibility.
That's a that's a beautiful way of putting that in. As I'm listening to you, and my brain, obviously, as a therapist with you, goes into, okay, we open these matters, we look at them, and then go back into looking at, well, what is the steps of treatment or working? Because I also remember even when I used to read Enneagram and look at all these stuff, they were steps of how to emotionally regulate or shift from one of the numbers to the other. And I'm assuming that as you are looking at all of these patterns scientifically, that if some part of the characteristic or parts of the emotional or the thought process or the behavior is not workable, that there are steps to practice to bring yourself back into that wholeness.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so what we use is this great term that my colleague David Daniels used to use. I love it. It's called a growth edge. And that each person's growth edge is just different. But depending on your pattern, the growth edge will involve certain challenges. So one way to begin is just to say that every pattern has an upside of strengths and opportunities and things to build on. And also at the same time, depending on where you're at in your own growth, it has a downside, which are vulnerabilities. You can call them weaknesses. These vulnerabilities are very specific to each pattern, and we can go through the 9 patterns if you want, but that's an entire book, right there. So, but the idea for a therapist or for a person learning this is that when you learn the vulnerability and strengths of each of the patterns, you know how to actually work with, let's say, yourself. If your history of non-secure attachment is making you more on the vulnerable side, we call that a non-integrated way to be. And you want to learn to be more integrated, which is what learning or earning secure attachment is all about. So one of the paths towards secure attachment is to build on your sense of wholeness through these different growth edges, through the lens of your personality pattern. So let's say for me, for example, my baseline tends to be in the certainty vector, which means I can be prone to anxiety and fear. When I'm dyadic, when I'm toggling between inward and outward, I'm filled with worst case scenario thinking. And the bad part about that, the vulnerable part, the weakness of that, is I can become paralyzed with analysis paralysis. I can see all sorts of options. I can see all the positive about it, but get preoccupied with all the negatives, and I just don't do a thing. So the way to move through that is to realize that my sense of fear is driving this longing for certainty, which is not attainable in life. So I have to learn in this growth edge for that baseline, I need to learn to embrace uncertainty and to realize fear is not a weakness. Fear is just an emotion. And I can use the doubt that's created in this particular pattern. That's the classic thing. I'm questioning everything. Even I'm questioning my own questioning. It's even amazing. I've even never written a book, let alone 21 books. It's just like wild. But once you start working through that, then that growth edge would be that way. But for someone else, who might be in the bonding vector, let's do for you, in the immersing pattern of the bonding inward, where you're upregulating all this emotion of everything, basically, including sadness. So if you say you're by yourself, you feel that way, you can actually become overwhelmed with this feeling like something is just missing. There's a longing I have. I just wish I could have that thing. There's something missing. So the growth edge for you would be different from me, where I have to embrace uncertainty. You're going to embrace this reality of a journey that, we used to be whole in the womb. And in the Big Bang issue, we used to be whole in the universe before all this stuff was created in the universe. And so this deep longing will never be completely fulfilled. So rather than get really depressed about that, you go, okay, so let's have a party in the meantime, and then you let yourself realize that, as one of my patients once said, when we talked about it at this level, she said, "You mean I don't have to take my ennui so personally?" I said, exactly. Just have fun with your ennui, And when you think about it that way, then you go, okay, I'm longing for something that I'll never have. Yeah, that's true. You and every other human being on the planet will never get back to being in the womb. It's not going to happen. So you go, oh my God, let me go to a retreat and meditate for 500 years. No, that's not going to even do it. Even though you'll have glimpses through, we have this practice called the Wheel of Awareness, where people can get back to that wholeness in pure awareness, but then you realize you're back in a body and you have to be aware of things, not just be aware of awareness. Anyway, that's another story, but that would be your growth edge. And someone in the agency group, just to give you one example, let's see, we've done inward for you for bonding. We've done dyadic for me. So let's do outward. So someone who's outward in the agency group, and there you actually can see, one of my patients decided to write a whole book about her therapy with me, and she was in this group, Agency Outward. So you can actually read about her changes. This is Chelsea Handler wrote the book, Life Will Be the Death of Me, about her therapy with me. So, she's given me permission to talk about it, because she talks about it all the time and we've done a podcast together on her podcast. But, with Chelsea, you'll see what it meant to be able to work with her around being an agency outward, which in the Enneagram world is called an 8, and to really realize that some of the vulnerability there is because you're about my needs being met, but your energy is outward, then you're not so insightful about what the emotional needs you have are, and you're putting them out in the world about justice and fairness, which she does in a beautiful way in the world, and she's funny, so everyone's just laughing, but inside, she's aware of this incredible feeling of something that she needs to work on, which is really getting in touch with her vulnerability and, owning the fact that she's a part of a relational fabric of, people. So, the way she's changed has just been absolutely beautiful to hear about and to see myself as her therapist. So I have total permission to talk about her. That's unusual, but this is what she decided to do with the book. So, that would be an example of the agency outward, which is also where you go sometimes. So what's fun about this model too, is when you see it on a grid that I call a personality palette, when you see it on the grid, you can see how it all fits together in this kind of beautiful way. So if I'm, getting a little worried in my certainty dyadic space, I know that all I need to do is, in terms of my growth edge, is stop toggling inward and outward and just focus outward for a while. And I get like an Enneagram number 7, which is this seeking pattern where I'm doing all these fun things and doing all these activities. And I'm out with my dog and I'm running with my kids and I'm going to do this with my friends. And, you may say, what's going on with Dan? And, because I was too much, getting in the worry mode, or I just go inward instead of being inward and outward in the dyadic one. And now I'm busy reading and writing books and all this stuff. So you can see on this palette where you need to move your growth edge. And it gives you this incredible freedom and empowerment to explore all the 9 patterns. And so part of the growth edge for everybody is, yes, achieve the higher integrated functions of your own baseline pattern or patterns, but then, yes, also tap into the positive ways that every one of the other 9 patterns offers.
Absolutely. As you were sharing, I was remembering a lot of my own experience where I would go into this kind of when the bonding wasn't there, then to me, it was so drastic that it was more like, I don't want to live. It was very clear. I would go from one extreme to, that's it, I'm at the bottom of the well and I don't want to live.
Yeah.
Because if that's not the case, then I don't want to. Like, it's either have to be that oneness or I don't want to. And then the fear would take me into the outward concept of, okay, let me connect with people, but then the connection would be in a more controlling way because I needed to connect in my way in order to feel that bonding, which was working. Or then it was, okay, become a therapist where I could connect with people in a whole safe way, but then that was also outward. And then I think that part of my growth became that I, like you said, I had to let go of that fantasy and know that I'm alone and it's okay to be alone. And I think that was like a huge epiphany of, the desire of bonding was no longer a, dying or do or die concept. It was more about, I can bond and I can let go and the both are going to be okay. And as you were talking, I was looking at how all these like 30 years of, working on myself and the psychotherapy and all of that has shifted from any of those into this, like you talked about, this flow of emotional regulation as I see that I need to go, where do I need to go? And where am I and where do I need to go in order for it all to be workable and feel like that whole?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's so beautiful. And I hope that this PDP framework for you will make it fun and freer to, really make a shift in, and I don't know why this image of like, sometimes personality can be like a battleground, more like a prison, we're in this, there's all this fighting going on. We really want to not get rid of it altogether, but just allow it to be a platform that's more like a playground, as we said, of freedom, of possibility. So, this is where ultimately, when we do this kind of deep growth edge work, I think what happens with a lot of people is they come to realize there is, in fact, a wholeness in the universe, that all these personality patterns are, in a way, our attempt to get back there. And so when we drop out of that personality pattern into this kind of larger space, whatever our baseline is or was, that's where we meet each other, in that common ground, whether you call it a common awareness or kind of a common origin. And this is where, no matter where someone started, as people move forward in their growth edge, they access this deeper space of connection and love.
Off subject, isn't that also the desire that it keeps growing to do the deep meditation, or as a vehicle to go through psychedelics to get there faster on a grim, to feel that kind of a wholeness immediately?
I think exactly so. Going in nature can give you that sense of awe. Psychedelics, when they work in these medically controlled research situations, involves this expanded sense of self. Meditation, I think gives that opportunity too. We have this wheel of awareness meditation, and people get the same scores as if they were on psilocybin doing it. So I do it every morning, and it doesn't have any side effects except I feel really good. And there's probably a lot of positive things besides feeling good, like improving my immune system and making my cardiovascular system healthier, making my inflammation lower. And these are all research established views for having these things called 3-pillar practice, where you focus attention, open awareness, and build kindness. And this practice has it. So when you combine that with this personality pattern approach, you really are given a really deep way of really catalyzing your growth toward wholeness.
And is that because I know you've also written a lot of the books about consciousness, which I have them, and I read you and your colleagues, you created for Norton, you wrote about consciousness. With the space you're sharing about everybody going back to, is it kind of like a collective consciousness that holds that everybody's also moving back into the experience of?
Yeah, it could be, certainly what, Jung talked about collective unconscious. I think he talked about, but I think there was also collective conscious.
Mhm.
In the book Aware, I talk a lot about this, and the book Intra-Connected also, I think there is a spaciousness where it's kind of like the Pando Populous Forest in Utah, where you arrive at this forest in Utah, you see 48,000 seemingly separate trees, but what we know is that 6 inches beneath the surface of the soil, there's one root ball. And when they've tested the DNA of these trunks of trees in different sides of the grove, it's one tree, it's the same DNA. So what we know is one of the oldest and largest living things on Earth, but we also know it's an incredible symbol for, I think, humanity, where even though we're in different bodies, maybe with different backgrounds, different religions, different histories, different genders, whatever, we actually come from this common root ball. So I think pure awareness is that common root ball of our collective lives.
I want to share this with you, as you were saying, because I know you work a lot with Jack Canfield, and I was reading his book, The Path of the Heart.
Yeah, Jack Kornfield's beautiful writer.
So as I was reading this book, I was living in Northern California at that time, and there's a tunnel. And as I was reading his book, and I was going to a seminar, and as I was driving, in the tunnel, there was a shift, and then there was the car, and I was going to hit the car, and I was looking at the other person's eyes as I was coming to hit that car. And for some reason, and I've never happened before, but it was right when I was reading his book, this concept of utter awareness showed up, which I knew exactly how to put my foot forward where I could go a little bit forward so that the car behind me doesn't hit me, and then how to stop that I don't hit the one in front of me. I don't know how and who and why and all of that, but all I know is I stopped this close to the car in front of me, and the car behind me stopped this close, and we were all safe. And then we just said, hi, all good. And we all went our merry way. And it was the most amazing experience that I ever had.
Yeah.
And, isn't it? And it was like, and I was talking to my therapist at that time, which offered this book to me. And he said, it's just like, it's you're the material and experiencing, you put yourself in a position that you go beyond just your own knowing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Allow us a bigger picture. So I just wanted
That's beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
So everyone, the amazing book, Personality and Wholeness in Therapy by Dr. Daniel Siegel. Please read it, work it, go into it with really allowing yourself to embrace it and become aware of yourself and all that it can be. We're coming to a close. Is there anything that we haven't shared that you really want everybody to know?
No, just to come join us. You can, if you go to drdansiegel.com or mindsightinstitute.com, you'll find lots of resources there, things to get involved with, things related to the book, things related to consciousness, mental health, mindset, all sorts of things. So we welcome you and thank you for having me. I really have enjoyed our conversation as usual.
I always do. As you know, I follow you. I learn so much from you. And one of the biggest opening for me is you always have amazing foot in the science, and then yet another foot is completely open to experience different things that are in the world and bring it and make it scientific. And then, you know, based on that, bring it into the mainstream. So I truly cherish you for that.
Thank you. I cherish you too. Thank you, Dr. Zeine.
And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, bye-bye. Are you a psychotherapist looking to enhance your practice? The Awareness Integration Therapy developed by Dr. Foojan Zeine is a comprehensive guide to the principle and techniques of this powerful therapeutic approach. Join the growing community who have elevated their practice and expanded their skills by embracing awareness integration therapy and witnessing its life-changing impact. Order your copy on Amazon now.